right, so let's talk about week 5 project. So my goal on these overviews has actually been to kind of scale them back a little bit because the instruction really stands for its own. And the idea is that I just give you an overview and I show you what my output looks like. But I also want to make sure I've picked up on a couple things that I've added that haven't been covered in the course. So here's the instruction for week 5. So we call it the Great Refactor and Breathing Room, right? So now we're going to step into from simply painting it to focusing on the engineering side of it. Under the hood, is it fragile? If the user zooms, does it break? Right? If long paragraphs are overflowing. So in this project, in this step, we're going to refactor the CSS to use inheritance, relative units, RIMs, which we've been introduced to now in the box model. Now you saw this in week 4, but it's the same concept, is only use what we've covered so far, but I will introduce 2 new things you can use for this project. So we continue working in our our private repo in the project folder. Remember, no creating new folders for our project work. Just to let you know, I have mine open here, right? So I was just playing with it, doing some last minute tests to make sure everything was good. And I do have my live server running, and I'll show you mine in a minute. So the first thing you're going to do is actually set up a CTA, right? Kind of a call out part of your site. So in this case, you open your index somewhere in your main. Here's your starting content. But what you're going to do is customize this for your own topic, right? So this is just a call out, and this is going to allow us to implement some of that fun box model to understand how to use and leverage the margins and paddings concept. So go ahead and do a commit there. And then we're going to do some inheritance cleanup. And we saw this with what Kevin went over, where we're going to move from having our elements, right, as for selectors to have certain fonts and colors, but we'll move that up into the body. So you'll do that. And we've specified here some rim upgrades to do. Now, if you want to be a little more than this, if it wasn't exactly here, you have to think about, you don't want them too big. You definitely don't want them too small, but we're going to convert that body to rims as well. And then remember the rule of thumb that Kevin helped us understand about what one rim means, right? So if you specify 2, it's much larger, right? So your H1 could definitely be bigger, right? For sure. So then the line height, right? So we learned about that as well. So again, these are suggestions. I wouldn't go much bigger or smaller, but if you feel like you want to tweak it, that's totally up to you. So now link styling. So we're going to overwrite the default blue standard, what we call the agent, right? What is built into the browser, the user agent, and we're going to override that. Now, this is where we're introducing something new that you can use, which is called the hover. This was not covered and I'll show you how this looks in here. So wherever you want to have something when the user hovers over an A, you then can say A:hover and then tell it how you want it to behave, maybe giving it one of your colors, right? And that's just a really nice thing to do. And it makes your site start to look more and more professional. Now, in this case, play with this, see if you just kind of play with it and see where you might use it, right? So, and then do a commit here, and then you're going to actually look at give yourself a little breathing room using this box model. If you did, and I don't, at this point, I haven't seen your code, but if you did have any fixed heights, right, we're going to change those in this case, right? Check if any of them, if you've set and removed them, because we're going to use padding for that, right? So then in that section spacing, right, you're going to add margin block or margin bottom to your section so that your main tags don't crash into each other. And then style that callout box, right? So give it, and I'll show you mine. I think I used around 650, and then I added some margin as well, and some padding. And then I added a border and aligned it, which was fun. And then target your class. So in this case, you could definitely call it something else besides CTA. Call it something specific to what you had, right? So this is a class. Now, again, we're using classes, even though we haven't formally been introduced to them. They're really great to actually have a style that you can apply. And in this case, we're going to use a button style. Okay. So, and here's your new concept as well, is that I will show you this on mine, use text decoration. So what this is on your links, you can actually say, hey, I don't want you to actually put an underline, because in modern web development, we actually don't see as much underline anymore, because when the user hovers over it, right, it's just a nicer look. And then add some padding to that. And don't forget that hover state as well. And this is what we were talking about with the text decoration. I added it on my nav. And so in this case, if you happen to have some background and you think I could use descenders here, no, you can't. Just make sure you have different classes set up for this. And then here you have your commit. Okay. So in this case, you do want to add something to your README file, right? So open up a section, add this in your Markdown, explaining why we switched from fonts, pixels to rims, right? Explaining how you used the box model, implemented it with padding and margin, to style your specific box. Again, this could be a different style here. And then do the squint test. Like, does it look easier? Does it look good? Make sure everything, do your inspects, look at your box. This is really important. And you're probably, and at this point, I would say be doing this while you're doing the work, not necessarily at the end, because this is the workflow that most web developers will follow, as they will code something and then go look at it in the browser. And I think most of you are probably doing that as well. Now, do make sure you validate your HTML and your CSS, and do that. Okay. So these are your deliverables. You have your updated HTML. We have our refactored CSS for the layout. You have a README file with notes, and then you've pushed to GitHub. Now, here's my site as it exists right now. And I had fun with this, actually. This was really fun to play with. So what I did here is, you can see I did the hover, which was nice, and the text decoration none, so that you don't get that, which was totally fun. And then here's my call out. And then I did this also to create that button effect. Now, in this case, we could talk about if in web development you should use CSS to make a button-like thing, or actually use the button, which we haven't actually been introduced to. But we're simulating the idea of what is traditionally known as a button in HTML, which is fine for where we're at. Okay. So from last week, I could see that footer in there, and giving that footer a little space here. So then again, this is stuff we did last week. Okay, so my workout, cool, that looks good. So the other thing is to actually go through and make sure that everything works. So that's part of your last step, where you go through and you test everything. It's like, because sometimes, here's actually one thing that happened for me, was that based on the way I had styled my nav, it was actually my hover was actually the same color as my accent color, and it was like not showing up when I would hover over it. Okay, so I'm using hover here, and I'm using text decoration none on those. But again, because you're using that, you definitely want to make sure, because that's part of how I will grade, and remember how I do grade. Okay. So let's just go back to the instructions real quick. So in here, right, so I grade on your commits and associated code. Don't do all one commit, it really hurts you. And then make sure you give me, when you submit here, that commit history for the current folder, which in this case, that shouldn't be a question, but it's the project folder. Okay, I've shown that a couple times. Make sure you get that, because it is part of how you get graded. So have fun with this. To me, this is the fun part of what you get to do. You get to be exposed to things, you get to code along with them, and then you get to actually implement something on your own, which is, to me, where the fun comes. All right, talk to you later.